Thank you, Mara. And Dan was on the keyboard on the first song, and the second one, Steve? Robin. And again, Gideon, thank you, Gideon. And Noel on the vibes. And of course, Steve. We have some messages from some other friends, and we're going to start with Dr. Patricia Tsank.
What a terrible loss. Here we are now confronted by the very powerful presence of Richard's absence. We can sense him here with us tonight, perhaps a bit like the invisible man that intrigued him in his psychoanalytic explorations over this past year. The impression he has left on so many of us remains and will continue. I extend my deep condolences to all of you, and especially to Richard's beloved family, Nina and Jeff, Marissa, Bennett and Deborah, and little Evan. In the weeks since his death, I have been inundated with countless memories of the 6 years we shared together as a couple, a deeply caring, life-supporting, and complex relationship for us both. As most of you know, Richard was a very private man, and so many of the memories I have and would love to share, I must, however, keep private. So don't worry, Richard. Your secret wish to be a trolley train conductor is safe with me. Uh-oh, I just couldn't resist that one. This wish of his was in fact finally realized for some moments when we paid a rather long, all-day visit to the Trolley Museum in Maine on one of our holidays. That was one happy man at the helm of the Park Street trolley. In true Richard style, he ended up befriending the quirky and curious gentleman who ran the place. We eventually managed to leave, well past closing time. Playful, creative, inquisitive, and humorous, Richard loved a good laugh. As Nina also mentioned, comedy was dear to his heart. From Lenny Bruce and Andy Kaufman to Larry David and Andy Kindler, he had a particular affinity for the non-conventional. I recall laughing ourselves into near incontinence at many a Just for Laughs show. A certain Jeremy Holt's performance comes to mind, in fact. Richard, a man of many talents, indeed himself performed at the Just for Laughs festival, accompanying Bowser and Blue with his klezmer ensemble back, I think, in year 2000. Richard could play that clarinet with humor, with joyful celebration, or when the occasion called, with a deep melancholy that could bring you to tears. A born psychoanalyst, Richard had a deep passion for inquiry, investigation, and all forms of exploration. His range was far and wide. From a certain progression of notes in a musical passage, be it jazz, classical, klezmer, folk, or 50s rock and roll, to the life and psychology of artists such as Bill Evans, Eric Satie, Schumann, or George Eliot, all of whom he wrote about. From the banality of evil in the psychology of Eichmann, Richard did a thorough analysis of Eichmann's Rorschach responses, and the tragic life of Sabina Spielrein, to where to find the best darn hoagie sandwich in all of Philadelphia. Richard loved a challenge. That being the case, there were plenty of adventures to be had when in his presence. I recall one summer evening, he decided that we should explore where we might find a decent outdoor basketball court. We inflated our old ball and set out experimenting with all the different courts around the city. From somewhere in Lower Westmount to East End, Montreal, we eventually concluded with our last one-on-one well past midnight somewhere in Côte Saint-Luc. Once he had an idea to do something, there was no stopping him. Richard was a man with so many facets and layers. Though superbly intellectual, with vigorously highlighted books and journals always in tow, he was also deliciously down to earth. Nothing seemed to please him more than a good piece of cherry pie and a chocolate egg cream. Though he required and enjoyed his privacy, he also loved being surrounded by friends, family, or simply immersed in a crowded stadium of fellow sports fans. Last, I could not commemorate Richard without some mention of a discovery he made about himself later in his life, his talent as a cat whisperer. As Nina mentioned, he had never had a pet until our cat, Psyche. At first, Richard was quite ambivalent about having this little creature in our home, but to my amazement, Richard and Psyche soon became the best of friends. I would come home, and there they would be, cuddled up together, watching the game. She was a loyal spectator. After her death, Richard was nearly inconsolable. It was at that point that we discovered the 3 kittens who would become Richard's little buddies to the end. Eli, Jeremy, and Leah would follow him around the house, run to the door to greet him, and especially loved being perched on his shoulders. Annoyed though he appeared at times, there was no doubt about the bond he had with his furry friends. Richard was a most sweet and gentle soul, genuine and caring, witty and wise. I feel most fortunate to have shared some of this wild and wonderful life with him. For this, I will always be grateful, and I will always miss him.